So, Dr. Cristi Bundukamara, also known as Dr. B, is a psychiatric mental health nurse, practitioner, veteran, educator, author, and creator of the Mentally Strong method. After experiencing the devastating loss of three of her children, she turned her pain into purpose by building a practical, skill-based system that helps people organize their thoughts, manage emotions, and rebuild mental strength. Today, she helps high-functioning women work through grief, burnout, and major life transitions so that they can think clearly, trust themselves again, and move forward with purpose. Disclaimer: any of the guidance offered by the podcast host, myself, or the podcast guests is our own guidance. We are not liable for any of the actions the podcast listener decides to do. Welcome to the show, Dr. B. Glad to have you.
Perfect. I love that intro. I really appreciate that and love what you're doing. I mean, self-esteem and confidence. I talk a lot about confidence. Many people kind of show up externally with confidence, but I teach like internal confidence starting from the inside and really being able to increase capacity and show that confidence. And I listened to some of your podcasts and you're doing it. You're living it. You're trying to, find those things that are separating that and really working on that self-esteem, right? That inner confidence. So thank you for having me on the podcast. Listeners, definitely go follow the podcast, share it with someone who needs to hear for sure. So thank you.
I know, I appreciate that, Dr. B. And appreciate the kind words there about if you feel called to, and also love what you're talking about with working on the inside, not just that outside of
Hmm.
confidence, which I know a lot of people are needing support in that, and I know I've needed a lot of support as I work
Hmm.
through my life as well, through that internal as well as just the external confidence as well.
Right.
So I know you've got the mentally strong method, strong being big letters, and you got it in bold. I
Yes.
didn't say it boldly when I said it, but you call it the
Uh-huh.
mentally strong method. We'd love to hear a
Hmm.
little bit about where that name came from.
Yeah, I think when I was going through my trauma, so I was already a psychiatric nurse practitioner, so I had the academic knowledge, right? What do you do when you're, how to make good decisions, how to work through whatever's going on in your mind. But I had lost one son in a drowning accident. I had a second son who was having catastrophic epilepsy and two daughters who were running away. So this complete overwhelm of how do I actually take care of myself and the and mental strength. I would always like read self-development books, things that represented mental strength. And I felt like there was this huge disconnect that everybody was telling you just think positive and positive things will happen. And that is true. Like that is maybe 60% true, right? Like you do have to work on that inner dialogue. And you talk about it a lot when you talk about self-esteem, that inner dialogue that's kind of holding you back. But there's other things that were holding me back. I was working on that inner dialogue. I knew that I needed, positive psychology and I needed to think positive, but I was experiencing traumatic things. I was experiencing grief after grief, because not only the grief of a death, but every time your child has a seizure, there's a little bit of grief. Every time the doctor says it's not going to get better, there's a little bit of grief, right? And so here I'm living in this grief and trauma over and over again and, experiencing anxiety. And there was all these things. And I realized it's not just about positive psychology.
Mm.
And we don't actually have a system to help us learn this, right? We thank goodness for the anti-stigma movement that started teaching mental health, but it really taught mental illness. Like, here's depression, here's anxiety. This is what you do if you have those things, which is great. But we've also given children a language for mental illness rather than a language for mental strength. And I realized over and over again that even though I had all this academic knowledge and I was reading all of these books, there was not a system that could help me. And so I began developing it myself. And it actually took me 10 years to kind of complete this mentally strong method and start to share it. But it started with thinking clearly. And we often do one of two things. We either ruminate, which is like this kind of overthinking and it never going anywhere, or we avoid.
Mm.
And there's actually something in the middle that allows you to think and process and connect dots so that you can do something about it. And so then the second phase in the mentally strong method is organizing. And in organizing, there's like these 10 categories. And I realized as I was developing this that the things that I was learning, the things that I already knew,
Mm.
there was a place for them. But people who are trying to do them don't know what place they go in. For example, you do breath work. Breath work is amazing, right? But breath work can help decrease your anxiety, but if but it probably won't like work on all your grief and trauma by just doing a simple exercise of breath work. Now, you've kind of trained deeper and there's ways to do that, but thinking about the average person, right, that goes to a breathwork practitioner and they're trying to get everything fixed from this one activity, and they feel better when they're doing it,
Mm.
but there's no organization to it. What was I actually doing? So in the anxiety piece, we would say, okay, this breath work. I always talk about anxiety as a continuum, like we're trying to bring it down to a manageable place because mild anxiety actually allows us to be productive. And so instead of trying to get rid of anxiety, we're trying to bring it down to a manageable level. Breath work is great for that. But, what were you anxious about? Right? What is underneath that anxiety? And there's typically a cumulative effect to that. It's not just what you're doing right now or what's causing you anxiety right now. There's often patterns in that. And so when I do a thought map, going back to the think place, if we wanted to map anxiety, we would say, okay, here's anxiety. What's making you feel anxious now? What's made you feel anxious in the past? When were you anxious as a child? And then how does this impact your spiritual relationship? And the spiritual relationship, I think, is super important. We oftentimes in mental health, we are afraid to address this because people are scared that they're going to share a specific belief system. And I really do it from a holistic, person, how does this impact your spiritual relationship? We get all that out on one piece of paper and then we put it into these categories. What are your triggers? Because triggers you really can't control. They're external. But if you can name them, you know what to do with them. You know that they're triggers, right? What is your grief? What is your trauma? And grief and trauma needs to be dealt with completely different. And I
Mm.
can tell you, when I was going through this enormous grief of losing children, I studied all the grief theories and they were all incomplete. And for people who have lost a children, a spouse, or had traumatic grief, there's the trauma and the grief get enmeshed together. And the way that we process trauma, the healthy way to process trauma, is to process it and release it. And there's lots of different ways we can do that. We can do that through breath work. We can do that through yoga. We can do that through professional EMDR, brain spotting. Like there's ways to do that. But when somebody has experienced traumatic grief
Mm.
and it's enmeshed with their grief, the pain of your grief is your story, your honor. You are allowed to feel that pain for the rest of your life. 20-year anniversary of my kid's death, I'm going to still allow myself to feel that pain. Now, the intensity and frequency in which you have to feel it should decrease. But what happens when you go to somebody and you have this traumatic grief, and it could be divorce. I've worked with a lot of people where a divorce was actually a traumatic grief. And someone is telling them that they need to let go of this pain, right? As far as trauma work. But the grief is so powerful. Grief is different. It's who you are. It's your story. It's a pain that you have to feel. We don't like to feel pain in our culture, right? We like to, suppress it or take a medicine for it, or go to a practitioner and they're going to take away my pain. And that's the bad news. The pain of grief, you have to feel it. And so acknowledging this separation between grief and trauma, that yes, we can do this work to release the trauma, because trauma physically stores in the body, and I know you know that, but the grief is kind of your story and your pain, and you have to allow yourself to feel that. And we don't like to feel pain, right?
Mm.
And many times, and I know there's listeners that are thinking this, like, they've gone to therapy, they've tried to talk about it, they're doing all these things, they're, doing breath work, but if you don't have an organizational piece to why you're doing the certain things, right? In ownership, a lot of professionals, they know why they're doing it for somebody, right? They know they're trying to help them release their trauma, or they know they're trying to help them decrease their anxiety. But if the consumer doesn't truly understand, and many of us went to school for 8+ years, right? You're not going to truly understand what we understand. And it empowers the individual to know why they're doing things and what they're doing it for, and in what categories. There's also a category for injustices. These are big external things that trigger something in us, and we can either choose to do something about it, or we have to choose to let it go. But many times people's identity gets kind of crushed from these injustices. Like, these things are happening to me. I was born this way. I was born with these parents. I was, my son died in a, not my son, but I worked with someone whose son died in a drunk driving accident.
Mm.
Huge injustice, right? And you have two choices. They could have let it go and not done anything big about it. They chose to, like, speak for Mothers Against Drunk Driving, and like be actively a part of trying to change the injustice. And putting those things into bite-sized pieces, so that when we choose, and this is, I call it the power of choice, we can choose with insight. We know why we're doing it and what the expected outcome is. And it's a flywheel. So we have to repeat this over and over again. There is no quick fix to your journey,
Mm.
right? It is a journey. All the things that have happened to you in the past, if you've let them accumulate, then you're still holding them like weights. And I worked with someone that recently said, you don't know the weights that you're carrying when you've been carrying them for so long, right? It's like, just like if you were 20 pounds heavier, you don't realize how that feels, because it took a while to gain that 20 pounds, and you've been carrying it for a while, right?
Mm.
Same is true of our emotional weights. Sometimes we're carrying things that we have no idea. And there's lots of people listening that are in survival mode, right? They're just grasping at things, or they're doing nothing, and they're not finding joy. They're not finding happiness, right? They feel either stuck, or like they're in survival mode, or, lots of things are going on in their life. And I teach capacity. Like, we can increase our capacity for not only the things that we have to do, but the things that we want to do, and, finding joy and happiness, because we have more capacity for that.
Got you. I'm
Yeah.
glad you touched on the distinction between grief and trauma, because I know they're very, and it's useful for me here, like,
Mm-hmm.
particularly as well, because I know they're used kind of like sometimes interchangeably. It's the same thing, and
Yeah.
yeah, it's really interesting what you said there. Was grief?
Yeah.
So what you're saying is grief can be like you shared very vulnerably your story. 20 years
Mm-hmm.
later, you still, of course, feeling like grief. Grief could
Mm-hmm.
also be, as you were saying, maybe in the form of a divorce in some people's cases,
Right.
or something hard. But that's
Yeah.
something that may be with you for the rest of your life, but
But
traumas.
it's part of your story, right?
Okay.
And this is, people ask me, how can you stand up there and talk about your kids and tell your story? Because it makes me proud. I have confidence in my story. I have confidence that I have let go of the trauma. If I tear up on stage for a little bit, so what?
Mm,
Right? That's my story. But I have been able to separate it from the trauma and it's not eating me up inside. So many people that I work with that are listening, they have something in their life that is eating them up inside and they just don't know what to do with it. And in separating this grief and trauma, you do have to spend some time in the pain of the grief. I know you watched a little bit of the documentary and you can see me in
mm,
very vulnerable positions of grieving and crying and allowing those tears to happen. What often happens with people, they'll have those moments that they allow themselves to cry and that kind of stuff, but it's enmeshed with the trauma. And when you solidify trauma, you're just pushing it in deeper, right? So when we talk about what trauma is doing in the body, and the more we think about it and talk about it, we actually are making it worse, right? Physically making it worse, creating neural pathways around that story. And so being able to separate the grief and trauma, you're preventing that, right? So the crying and the grieving, I always tell people, if you go through a session where you let yourself, and I call it controlled grief. I'll go into this room in my house. It has a lot of my kids' things, and I'll bring out photo albums and pictures, and I'll allow myself to cry. After I'm done, I feel better.
mm,
When you're doing it enmeshed with your trauma, you don't feel better after. You
mm,
want to go drink or you want to do another coping mechanism that helps put it back in the box, right? And so, being able to do these things, and I can tell you, and you know this, grief is stored in the lungs, and breath work is very hard for someone going through grief. It can be very liberating, but there has to be kind of this acknowledgement that it is going to be painful. It is hard to take deep breaths when you're sitting in that grief. It is hard to focus on that and really being able to decide the intention before going in. Are we letting go of trauma? And so you might want to do breathing exercises that are more like releasing and short and fast, versus, are we trying to take in this pain and feel it, right? And so it's not that breath work can't work for a lot of things. It's just knowing what you're doing going in and really being able to separate those pieces because, especially in grief and trauma, right? The pain of grief is yours. And I can tell you the intensity and frequency in which I have to cry like that decreases over time. You know, there's lots of people that say, oh, time heals all wounds. That's not true.
mm,
Uh, but if you're doing it properly, if you've separated the trauma, the intensity and frequency will decrease. You can increase your capacity around that pain. We talk about the pain of your grief. Let's just envision it like this black ball in your heart. And people think processing it means the ball gets smaller. That's not what it means. Like if you can increase your capacity around that, you have more room to find joy and happiness and still honor that pain.
mm. Got you. What I
Yeah.
kind of heard you say, and it kind of reminded me of someone as well, like a mentor I had, and he was sharing his when his father died, his stepmother got caught in what he called grief and stayed there. He,
Mm-hmm.
because he's a self-mastery expert, used grief to his advantage to process what he needed, but he didn't live there and went back to
Mm-hmm.
kind of, you know,
Yeah. And there's many of us that, are figuring it out along the way. And I always, when I get in a group and I'm speaking to high performers, because high performers are doing their research, they're figuring it out, they're figuring themselves out. But then if you ask them, how did you do it? They don't actually have a system. They're like, oh, well, I tried this helped. And what the mentally strong method is, this system that anybody can figure out. Like it's easy to teach. And then as they pick the things that are working for them, they know what they're doing it for and why they're doing it. And then they can really repeat the process over and over again.
Okay.
Because I hate to break it to the listeners, you will have more hardship in your life. Like it's, life is hard. We want it to be easy. We want a magic fix, but it's a journey. We're supposed to be figuring things out. And the mentally strong method is this foundational system. And so as I tell my story, when my son got sick, that 10 years from his getting sick to him passing away was when I developed the mentally strong method. And it was just a survival tool for myself. When he died, I knew I had to share it with people. And so I opened Mentally Strong. I opened a clinic. We started sharing the mentally strong method. And then my daughter died in her sleep, completely unexpected. And I can tell you it became my safety net, because with my son's death, he was sick for so long. His life was traumatic, but his death was not, right? My daughter's life was not traumatic, but her death, the suddenness of it, the unexpected, the having to do CPR on her, like all of that surrounding her death was very traumatic. And I can either replay that story in my head, or I can replay the girl that I miss, the love that she shared with people, all of those things. That's the pain of grief. The trauma is that day and everything around that day. For my son, it was a little more complicated because it was over a period of time. And so there was lots of, little traumas throughout his life, but there was still a piece, there was moments and all the things that we fought for and the things that we did and missing the type of person he was, and that he was a fighter. I always say my son taught me how to fight and my daughter taught me how to love, right? And that their personalities is who you miss, and the pain of that grief. But the healthiest way is to be able to figure out what pieces of that is trauma and how do I let that go? How do I process that out of the body?
Got you. Yeah. It's really, I think, yeah, it's really useful distinction on the trauma, because I know it can run a lot of, I guess, from your work, maybe people have come to you, trauma can run a lot of people's lives in the background without them even realizing.
Well, and I think a lot of successful people, it's running in the background,
Oh yeah, that's
right? It's not just the people coming in a mental health clinic. It's,
sure.
you know, that when we think of mental strength, we think of words like grit, resilience, mental toughness. Mental strength is not mental toughness. Like mental toughness is almost just like a coping mechanism, a survival. I'm a survivor. You hear lots of people tell their stories. I'm a survivor. So most people think that mental toughness and mental strength are interchangeable, but mental toughness is more of that, you know, just survivor mentality. And I teach how to actually live and grow. You know, people say what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Not true either. There's plenty of homeless people, plenty of people in jail and in mental hospitals that would disagree. Like, you know, they didn't get stronger from the things that happened to them, right? We need to teach this. It's not born, it's built. And we have this mentality that it's born. We also use the word grit a lot. Grit is a great coping mechanism. If you are going through something right now, you need to find the grit to push through. But if that is your only coping mechanism, you will hit a capacity limit. You will get to a point where you can't push through, right? And then we have things like nervous breakdowns and things like that, right? So I teach this system where you're doing this flywheel over and over again, and you're gaining momentum and you're increasing capacity. So grit can be a piece or a coping mechanism within that, but it's not the, be all for mental strength. We also use the word resilience. And resilience again just means that we can handle whatever is given to us, right? But what if what you've been given is too much? I would have described myself as resilient, right? Then I lose a kid, then I get a kid that's sick, and then he dies, and then my daughter dies, and ultimately my husband died as well. Like, everybody has a capacity limit, and whether you're almost there or, but making sure we have the tools, the mental strength capacity is going to allow us to continue to find joy and happiness. One of the worst things for me when I tell my story is when people are like, oh my God, I'm so sorry for you. I know they're trying to be, empathetic and understanding, but having empathy for that doesn't help you. And I'd rather be known that I actually live mental strength,
Mm.
right? And I happen to have a pretty tragic story to prove it, right? But it's about, we can all learn this mental strength.
Mm. Like it, not just this resilience and kind of,
Mm-hmm.
you say it, kind of the grit is the, pushing on rather than like processing, and the way you
Mm-hmm.
described it there. Um,
Yeah.
and you're
And
right.
I'm sure.
I can think of examples where people were very successful, people model them, but they come out on these interviews and it's actually, well, a lot of their success was driven from unprocessed stuff with, fights with
Yeah.
relatives, loss of parents when they're younger, all these kind
Mm-hmm.
of things. So, yeah, that's a
Yeah.
good point.
And the other thing you hear a lot in the, kind of high level people is this imposter syndrome. They're like, I'm showing up every day, but on the inside, I don't have that confidence.
Mm,
And this this gives you the confidence, right? Like, if you went through and really learned the mentally strong method, you would leave with, I know how to think clearly. There's clarity in thought. I know how to increase my capacity if I just keep doing this over and over again.
mm,
I can communicate all of that. This is the other thing. Sometimes we're doing it, we're surviving, we're figuring things out as they come, but when we go to try to help someone else, we can't communicate what I did and how other people can do it. And so imagine coming home from work and having a horrible day. You come home, kids are a mess, and your spouse says, you know, can you do X, Y, and Z for me? And your first thought is, nobody cares about me walking in the door having a horrible day, right? But if we can learn to increase capacity, we can learn to communicate how we feel, what made us feel like that, why we feel like that, and then we know what to do. But what typically happens, someone in that situation, they come home from work and either them and their spouse gets into a fight because they're both at their capacity limit, right? Or, they just keep suppressing it
mm,
and, kind of push through, and then they have that internal dialogue that nobody cares about me, right? And that's what produces confidence, that clarity. I call it the 4 C's: clarity, capacity, communicate, gives you that confidence of, I am mentally strong.
mm. Love the mentally strong method that
Mm-hmm.
you're giving people. I know you also help um, women, as I mentioned at the start, with like burnout. How do you feel like burnout comes about for people?
I think it's just a new word for overwhelm.
Mm,
They've hit that capacity limit, right? Burnout is just that you've hit your capacity limit. You can't do anymore and you're just surviving. It doesn't mean you've quit your job and, laying at home depressed. No, it's, you've hit that capacity limit and you can't do anymore, including finding joy,
Mm.
right? So you're just there in this burnout, and everyone, there's lots of people, oh, quit your job, do this, do that. But most high performing people are not going to back down like that. They're just, they're just not, right? I'm not going to spend less time with my kids. I'm not going to try to, you know, please my spouse, right? Like all of these things that I've chosen to do, I want to keep doing,
Mm.
but I've hit my capacity limit.
Mm. So with that capacity limit, is it just about going back to the method again and
Hmm.
allowing yourself?
Because, yeah, and releasing some of those weights, right?
Mm.
Because, whatever's going on internally are these weights,
Yeah.
and some people know what they are, but they don't know what to do with them. Like you said, you were talking to, high level achievers that are like, oh, I lost my parents when I was young. Like they know they have stuff. They don't know how it's still impacting them.
Mm.
And that's where the thought map comes in. And if you would give me a few minutes, I'll actually do a thought map on you.
Oh yeah,
You open for that?
yeah, we said we are going to do that at the start, didn't we? So let's do it.
Yeah.
Let me grab a
So,
glass of water so I'm
if,
hydrated.
yeah, is there a thought or a feeling that comes up for you a lot? Like anxiety, sadness, anger?
Mm. For me, it's probably like I'd say anger, probably.
Okay. And so we start just like this, like put anger in a bubble right in the middle of the page. And I have an exclusive offer for your listeners where they will get like the actual instructions to doing a thought map on themselves. It
Mm.
is an advanced skill that, but you have some high level followers, and I want to, honor that of like they can learn to do this. So when you think about anger, what's making you angry right now in your life?
It's probably it's something I've worked on is letting go of that control a little bit. Like not the control freak, never try and control people, but when things don't go my way, there can be that little bit of like I understand intellectually things are never
Mm-hmm.
going to go to plan, but emotionally there's still a part of me that goes, ugh, and just that anger
Right.
builds up a little bit inside.
Right. Okay. What else?
Um, yeah, there's probably still like there's also an element of not even though there's that better relationship, that achiever of like I should be further ahead in certain things than I am, or not performing.
Okay. Okay.
Say for example, me and my girlfriend, I love to bits. I do something wrong or mess something up as a guy. I'm like
Mm-hmm.
really angry at myself because I'm like I should be doing better for her. And it's could just be
Mm-hmm.
small things.
Okay. So kind of I should statements.
Yeah, there's quite a lot of I shoulds.
Okay.
So,
Let's go a little deeper on that one. What kind of person should you be?
uh, just I should feel like I should be a good leader to people I love, people around me, being an example
Example of what?
of like a good, kind person.
Kindness. Okay.
Yeah,
Success.
yeah.
Anything else?
Um, there's a part of me that feels like I should know how to do like basic things sometimes. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. What has made you angry in the past?
Um, I'd say when not being heard or seen, like,
Okay.
and I'm very sensitive to other people's, just when I can be to say I understand, understand your viewpoint. Maybe I've got a different viewpoint. Beautiful. But in the past, like when people just like dismissed maybe what something I've said or something.
Okay. And do you have specific scenarios going on in your head right now? I know you don't want to share because it's, this goes public and your friends still watch, but
That's all right.
yeah, do you have like,
Yeah, I had specific
yeah,
examples. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
And this is, if I'm working with someone intimately, right, we're putting down some of those examples and kind of seeing some patterns there. But can you remember being angry as a child? Were there times where you got angry as a child?
yeah. I think there was a feeling. I'm going to say I know they're different things, but a feeling of because I recently did this in a deep diving event I was at with a guy I've actually interviewed, but there's kind of a very fine line for me between feeling scared to anger. It went very quickly from scared to anger, which is quite
Mm,
interesting. And I have situations of being both and it flipping between them.
okay.
Mm,
Yeah, that's important. And then we would go through and we would add a bunch of bubbles around, those situations. And then the last question is, how does this impact your relationship with your spiritual relationship?
Um, in terms of believing, believing something, sort of, trusting life and those kind of things, I think
Mm-hmm.
I try to journal down when things show up as much as possible. So I'm like, evidence, getting that very left brain on board. But yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it does fit, you know, it does kind of block my trust and allowance sometimes for
Mm-hmm.
things to just be and flow.
Is that evidence that you should do something? Evidence that you're not measuring up? What evidence are you collecting?
Um, I think it's more evidence that I should do things that I'm collecting.
Okay.
Very high standards.
Mm-hmm. Right. And then we would look at this and we would say, and the paper always looks like kind of messy
Love
and,
it.
we're all over the place and we would, dive deeper and get personal if we were on a one-to-one. But then we look at, and I ask you, like, what are the patterns that you see here? And I would even ask you, as the host of the, self-esteem and confidence mindset podcast, right? Like, there's a reason you chose that
Mm,
name, and it really resonates with your thought map,
mm,
right? It's like, this is what
sure.
I'm working through. And so, therefore, this is what I want to share with the world.
Yeah,
Would
absolutely.
you agree?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So then we would take that thought map and we would put it into the different categories, the obvious, any negative thoughts and stuff like that. But the shoulds would probably go under anxiety because you probably think you should be perfect. And intellectually that's not possible.
Mm,
But boy, you are trying really hard to be that.
mm.
Sounds like. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong.
No, that's odd. I know you're right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, we would put that into anxiety and put it on a continuum because what's happening with the black and white thinking or the all or nothing thinking is I'm either perfect or, I should have been better, right? Like,
Mm,
instead of like a more accurate assessment and say, okay, if I had to rate that on the scale of 0 to 10 and 10 being I did it perfectly, where was that? And next time could I be a 7.5, right? Could
yeah.
I improve because we know that we're never going to be perfect, but we allow the imperfections to beat us up,
Mm,
right? And we can learn how to allow them to fuel us to continue to make good decisions, but we waste a lot of energy in the way we tell a story. We
mm,
just it's a lot of energy. And so if you can learn to organize it quickly and know what you're supposed to be letting go and what you're supposed to be managing and what you're supposed to be honoring, right? So that's why there's all these different categories. And one of them is spiritual conflict that comes up a lot. And,
Wow.
because we live in this world that's very, you're supposed to believe this way, or there's people that, oh, never believe that way. And everyone has a very strong opinion. And we're not allowing people to like develop spiritually. In my Raising Mentally Strong Kids course, I talk about spiritual development. And it starts with trust and security when they're young. And then of course parents want to teach their kids what they believe, right? And that's okay and honorable in that age from like 5 to 11. But at age 12, we need to allow kids to begin to explore what they believe, not what they were told. And your spirituality is a feeling, right? If it's a true connection, it's you feel it. You don't just know it because you were taught it, right?
Yeah.
And so, allowing us to develop in that spiritual walk.
Mm. I
I
love.
love how you acknowledge like the trust. It's like, if there's a God, if there's a universe, if there's something bigger, boy, I'm having trouble trusting that it's on my side.
Yeah, and it goes back to just for me as an example there, but I've definitely heard other people say it. It's the intellectually knowing something versus actually
Hmm.
how your body's feel, your body, my body, or someone's body's feeling about something can be
Right,
different things.
right, right. Yeah.
It's interesting, and it's interesting what you brought up today about joy and do people have space for joy if they're like at capacity already? So
Hmm.
letting go of those emotional weights as you've been
Hmm.
sharing. Yeah. It's a bit like
Yeah.
an analogy I was just thinking of if like you're working out at the gym and you're wanting to do some pull-ups or a machine, but somehow you had all these weights tied down to you, you're going to be restricted at a certain point. But if you let them
Hmm.
go, it's going to allow you to fly a bit
Yeah.
more.
Right. Right. Yeah.
As that example.
Um,
I love that. No, that's good. That's gonna be a really amazing tool to the listener. I know. So I
mhm.
really appreciate your generosity in that one.
Yeah.
Mm,
Yeah. And I have that exclusive offer. You would find it at mindset.mentallystrong.com. I work with a lot of high level professionals, men and women, that know they need something to increase that capacity. Maybe they've already been doing some work, but they're ready to grow. I mean, the best place to do it is in prevention, right?
mm,
Like because we are going to hit our capacity if we don't have tools for that. But this exclusive offer is a step by step of how to do the thought map.
mm.
So you would do that on your own, and then if then you would set up a call to like discuss it and get a little more insight into all of those pieces.
Oh, amazing. So yeah, Dr. B, people can find that offer there,
Yep.
which we will link in the show notes below.
Hmm.
Where else can the listener find you if they want to find out more about your work? Is that the best place? And
That is the best place. I don't want to confuse people with all the places, right?
sure.
And a quick Google search shows all of my, books and documentary and all the different things. But I'd really love people to go and take advantage of that offer.
Yeah, love it. So that'll be linked in the show notes below. And is there, as we close out today, any final words you wanted to summarize with today from our
Yeah, just those four C's, right? Learning how to increase capacity, learning how to think clearly, communicate, and have confidence.
the four C's?
Yeah.
Go wrong. So that concludes our episode for today. So you can find all of Dr. B's links in and main link in the show notes below. So definitely take advantage of that offer. But Dr. B, really appreciate you coming on today.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Absolutely. So that concludes today's episode. And remember to lead with your heart and not with fear.